Welcome to Backlog Weekend, the show where we take the weekend, pick up one kit from my backlog, and get that kit done before Monday. For this kit, as you already know by the thumbnail, we have chosen the limited web order Lexicanum Varus, a Terminator Librarian. I've always wanted to have a Terminator Librarian, but I've also always wanted to incorporate psychic effects into the base of my psychic units. I was very nervous to edit the base of Tigurius, which is my first psyker, because he had a custom molded base, and in order to make some psychic effects that I had in mind coming from the ground, using that model might be difficult to kit bash. Unfortunately for me, I ran into the same problem with this kit. You see, this kit also had a custom base with the feet attached. And I initially wanted to raise him up with cork and then have like psychic powers coming from the ground up. So I needed to kit bash this base if I had to achieve my dreams of getting a psyker that had powers coming from behind him. To make this a little bit more in tune with Space Marine lore, I have taken a look at whatever psychic powers I have here, and seeing that this guy is an Ultramarine, I have taken a psychic power from the Ultramarines data cards, and I'm hoping that when they update the Ultramarines cards, there will be a similar power that looks like some sort of a magic missile coming from the ground type of thing, or electrocution type of thing, so that at least when I use this model for my games, he would reference a certain psychic power. Games Workshop really has impressive sculpts. Like, I know they have the resources for it, but I'm very happy that, you know, they keep releasing better and better sculpts. I hardly had to clean up this model. A lot of the mold lines were easily hidden where I would glue them, so I had a great time building this kit. And also the base had an interesting tidbit, whereas at the bottom had like weird measurements or weird labels that I normally wouldn't see. Maybe it's because it's a limited web release, that's why it had like that sort of mold. Instead of adding some cork and build layers of effects for it, the solution was to drill into the molded base and kit bash from there. The concept now was inspired by Magnus the Red's Horus Heresy model. I took a lot of inspiration there. Of course, this guy is not a Magnus, but I love the effects that I saw on that model. Ever since I saw it, I was sort of drawn almost to buy that model just because it had those psychic effects. And I told myself I'll just probably make that and it might be interesting. So that was the inspiration for this guy, and I had to make these missiles come from the ground, bringing some rock with them. When I was building this kit, I did a lot of dry fitting just because the model was looking at a specific direction and it looked like he was casting something, and I had to make sure where I would build the direction of his psychic power would be similar to where his eyes would be, just so that the model would make sense. What you see here is the skeleton of our kit bash for our psychic powers of the base. I sort of marked where I wanted the energy or psychic energy to come from, and in this case I just sort of wanted two bolts of energy coming into one strong lightning bolt or like an energy missile. And I drilled two holes where I wanted that to be, and I super glued that really tight and I waited it for dry. Since it was drying, that's when I started to add my neodymium magnet to the base as well. And I also secured it with some Vallejo's seam line destroyer. Though it doesn't exactly function as an adhesive, I feel like adding that extra coat on top of the wires that are just super glued might reinforce it, because I will be bending these paper clips later on, and I need that security in the base to make sure the super glue connection will not snap. Then, to even make it even more solid, I added some texture paint from Vallejo. Again, it's all about building thick layers in the connection between the plastic base and these paper clips, or straighten out paper clips, because I wanted to make sure as I would bend them, these would not fall loose, because these two connection points are the only thing holding up what will be the psychic effects for this model. Once it was secure, I bent it into shape, in the rough shape or rough texture, and where I wanted the direction of the energy to go. And then I got some spare bits and spare cork that I've been tearing off and saving for later. And I just glued it. I glued them to random areas on the skeleton of our frame or model. When I was adding these rocks, aside from the fact that I was being very random about it, I had to make sure that I was constantly dry fitting the actual model onto the base as I would add rocks, because as you already noticed, I sub-assembled the base from the model so I could work really on the psychic effects. I also incorporated Vallejo texture paint and Arcom's seamline destroyer because they do add a sense of security to the frame of it, even though if that's not their real purpose. But in this case, I applied the putty first to sort of act as rubble and dust that were sort of lifted along with the psychic power and the rocks that were lifted with it. And then I applied a lot of the putty because that would be the actual energy or actual psychic effect that I would paint on. Because if you saw in my recent video, I also used the seamline destroyer as snow effects, and now I'm using it as psychic effects. So if you look at this one, you get to see how those three materials, the cork, the Vallejo texture paint, and the seamline destroyer, act all like an adhesive in hiding all of the paperclip skeleton, but also making the randomness a bit convincing that it is ground being lifted by psychic energy because of a magic missile being thrown at the enemy. It's at this point you want to make sure that every part of the paperclip is hidden. You don't want people to see that you're using a paperclip as a frame. While the seamline destroyer dries fast, I made sure I tilted the base downwards where all the energy would be, because this does drip as it dries, and I want it to dry moving toward where the projectile should be, so I tilted the skeleton drying in that way. If you do like what you're watching so far, please do consider subscribing, liking the video, and clicking the bell icon, and even leaving a comment or a recommendation or a suggestion how you like the video, how you don't like the video. Things like this could really help a small channel like mine grow and even just make more content, because I do love sharing my ideas to you guys. What I was trying to go for here is to make a sort of like energy bullet at the very end. That's why I wanted the liquid putty or the seamline destroyer drip towards the end of the flow of the psychic energy, and it didn't exactly come out the way I wanted to, even if I shaved it down. And so what I did is I took a piece of sprue and I just like whittled it down, like as if you were whittling down for a wooden spear, and then I glued that in. I put in some seamline destroyer as my putty, let it harden. I put some Vallejo texture paint to let it mold into the previous existing molds already, and that sort of became our base model or full sculpt for the energy streams coming from the base. And as you can see here, I primed everything and even the model. So I painted up this guy like how I would normally paint up in my normal ultramarines. I could show you guys a link to my paint schemes over here, but the only difference is, of course, I followed the back of the box in terms of the power armor, because of course my brand power armor is much darker. I undercoated, or I base coated everything I wanted to look like psychic energy a white. So for all the smooth pieces, all the pieces that you want to look magical, base coated in white. I wanted it to be base coated in white because I wanted this to be a bright energy, so we then applied a overall wash of Juchi Violet, which I further thinned down with thinner and flow improvers. So I wanted this to really be messy and flow all around, because I wanted some of that Juchi Violet to go onto the base coated areas and areas that I didn't mark as white, so it would sort of semi-cheat a slight OSL effect onto the stones. Didn't want to go overboard, I didn't want to take too long. Again, this is a weekend build. I then proceeded by layering or glazing over some heavy warm gray or a pinkish type of hue onto the raised areas. Right now it looks very fleshy, it looks like flesh and rock coming together. And I think what would really sell it is some lightning effects, because the psychic card, Storm of the Emperor's Wrath, does say that it is actually bolts of lightning. So I took inspiration from that, and I took my white color and I drew lightning bolts all over the place. And I made sure this lightning bolt was starting from the base up to the bullet at the end, or the point at the end, And I even painted lightning effects on the actual stones that were being lifted by the psychic effects. I wanted the lightning to connect all of these pink blobs into one stream of energy where the rocks being lifted are just engulfed in electric energy. So I wanted to make it random. A good technique here, or a good mindset that I did in painting this, was to just think of it as if it was a tree. A white tree growing roots from the ground up and then extending up to the point of the magic bullet or psychic energy. You could also end here, but I wanted to add a bit more variation into the tones, and I really wanted to sell the bright parts. So in order to sell the brighter parts, I took a rule of contrast and I took some contrast paint and just added some voluptuous pink into the more recessed or shadowed areas. So you have really high dark spots next to really light spots, so it does show like a big surge in energy at this and a big dip in energy in some areas. And that sort of, I think, for me, in my opinion, really sold the look and feel that we were going for. And afterwards, it's just a matter of gluing our model together, spraying him with varnish, and taking some nice beautiful photos. This whole series is just about motivating you guys to see your backlog in a different way. I always look at my backlog and I know I have plans for all my models, but sometimes I look at that and sometimes I feel as if I really don't have enough time in my life to paint all of these models. So if I can, I do take a weekend and I just get creative and focus on a single kit. All my time and effort is on that weekend is just one kit. So while I do blow off something on my backlog, I do get some creativity fulfilled for myself as a painter. I love backlogs. Backlogs is maybe the effect of our shopping therapy. It's also a nice thing to have because we always have a selection whenever we feel we're in a rut. Right now I've been painting a lot of commissions and army units, and actually I haven't been painting a lot looking at it because I am transitioning work, but my backlog gives me a selection of models that I haven't touched, and I could just like pick one up at random and start fresh and just get some clean perspective. Make a model, paint a model without any inhibitions or no rules or plans, and just go off the beaten path. I did want to have a Space Marine, I did want to have a Psyker with this type of psych effect, but I wasn't planning on doing that anytime soon with a specific model until I saw my backlog and I saw this guy, and I just sort of feel like I hit a couple of birds with even fewer stones. So don't be discouraged by your backlog, guys. I think any hobbyist out there has a healthy amount of backlog. Do something creative with it. I chose to make a show about it, and you guys can sort of challenge yourself with every new model you pick up. Maybe you could make themes, or you could randomize sort of things. You could get suggestions from your friends. You could paint it in an unconventional way. Use your backlog to practice on specific techniques you don't want. There's many ways to utilize our extra plastic lying around. There's no shame on having a backlog. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys learned on how to make energy come out from your bases. This has been Louie of Louie Loves Minis, reminding you it's a hobby every day to keep the sprues away.